Life has a way of testing us, often forcing us to confront painful truths in order to find our true selves. This is the story of Sophie, a talented photographer who spent years fighting for recognition, love, and respect from a family that never saw her worth. From years of rejection and humiliation to an unforgettable revelation at her sister's wedding, Sophie's journey is one of strength, courage, and liberation. Join us as we unfold this powerful story of self-discovery and triumph. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. I was never the daughter my family expected me to be. Growing up in a house where appearances and social status mattered more than anything else, I always felt like I didn't belong. My parents, Richard and Linda, were well-respected members of society in suburban Boston. My father, a successful real estate mogul, would often boast about his accomplishments in front of friends and business associates, while my mother, once a renowned model, maintained an aura of elegance that was admired by all. To them, everything had to be perfect. Their love for each other, their home, and their two daughters, Emily and me, was measured by how well we fit into their picture of success. But as long as I could remember, I never fit that mold. Emily, my younger sister, was everything they could have hoped for. Beautiful, charming, and effortlessly graceful. She was the kind of girl who turned heads wherever she went. She followed in our mother's footsteps and became a successful model in her own right, something our parents could flaunt at parties and social gatherings. To them, Emily was the perfect daughter, the one they could be proud of. And me? Well, I was the odd one out. The one who didn't quite match their expectations. It wasn't that I didn't try to make them proud. I did. I worked hard to carve my own path, even if it was one they didn't understand. From a young age, I was drawn to photography. The world behind the lens fascinated me. The way I could capture a single moment in time and turn it into something beautiful, something meaningful. But when I told my parents that I wanted to study photography, my father's face turned a deep shade of red, and he exploded in anger. "You can't make a living with photography," he bellowed. "It's not a real career. You're throwing your future away." But I didn't let that stop me. I enrolled in an art school, earning scholarships and working odd jobs at night to pay the bills. Over the years, I honed my craft, eventually making a name for myself as a freelance photographer. The satisfaction of capturing a perfect moment, of seeing my work in prestigious magazines like National Geographic and Time, was something I cherished deeply. Yet, despite the recognition and success, I couldn't shake the feeling that my family still saw me as a failure. One day, as I was setting up my camera in my tiny apartment, the morning sunlight streaming through the window, I received a call from my mother. I hesitated before answering. The familiar coldness in her voice was something I had grown used to over the years. "Sophie, did you get Emily's wedding invitation?" she asked, her tone sweet but sharp. I knew what was coming next. "Yes, I received it," I replied, bracing myself. "Good. Make sure you dress properly. Don't show up in something embarrassing like you did last year at Christmas." I closed my eyes, the memory of that Christmas still fresh in my mind. After a long photo shoot in New York, I had come straight to their home in casual jeans and a sweater. That night, I endured mocking glances from my mother and Emily, who couldn't hide their disdain. "It's Emily's special day," my mother continued. "Don't ruin it with your presence." I bit my lip, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. It was always the same. I had spent my entire life trying to win their approval, but nothing I did was ever good enough. I was the daughter they could never fully accept, no matter how much I achieved, and as much as I tried to convince myself that their approval didn't matter. Deep down, it still hurt. It hurt that no matter what I accomplished, they would always see me as an outsider in our own family. After the call, I threw myself onto the couch, overwhelmed by the familiar sense of loneliness that had haunted me for years. The constant feeling that no matter how far I traveled, physically or emotionally, I would never truly be part of the family. The worst part was that I knew I had been invited to Emily's wedding not out of love or celebration, but because it was expected. It was a formality, A way to maintain the image of a happy, perfect family. But despite all of that, I couldn't bring myself to ignore the invitation. There was a part of me, a small, foolish part, that still wanted to be part of their world, to have them see me as someone worthy of their affection. So, with a deep sigh, I set the invitation aside and went back to editing my latest photos. The images on my screen, children smiling and dancing in the bright sunlight, their joy and innocence radiating through the frame, reminded me of what I had never experienced in my own family: unconditional love. It was a painful reminder, but also a comforting one. Photography was my refuge. It was the only place where I felt truly seen. The day of Emily's wedding arrived, and the tension that had been building within me for years felt heavier than ever. As I stepped out of the taxi and adjusted the hem of my emerald green dress, I tried to compose myself. I wanted to appear dignified, elegant, yet modest enough to avoid further judgment from my family. This was supposed to be Emily's special day. A day when she would finally have the picture-perfect wedding she had always dreamed of. But to me, it felt like another stage in the performance they had been putting on for years. The Harrison family, polished and poised, living a lie. The ceremony took place in a historic cathedral just outside of Boston. A place that had been chosen for its grandeur. The high ceilings, the white and pink roses, and the transparent chiffon draped across the walls. It all felt like something out of a fairy tale. But as I entered the cathedral, the excitement and joy that should have been felt in such a momentous place seemed distant to me. I was already dreading the moment when my family would once again make me feel like an outsider. I approached the reception desk, where the hostess checked my name on the guest list. She paused, looking slightly confused, before guiding me to my seat. My heart sank when she led me to a small table at the farthest end of the room. The one that seemed to be so isolated from everyone else. The rest of the tables were filled with 8 people each. Relatives and friends gathered together, laughing and enjoying the evening. But my table? It had only one seat. A small, lonely seat, as if I were an afterthought. I couldn't help but feel the sting of humiliation. The other guests began to notice, their glances shifting toward me. Some filled with sympathy, others with confusion. It was clear they all wondered why someone who had been invited to a wedding would be seated alone like that. No one said anything, though. No one offered to help. Just as I was sitting there, trying to maintain my composure, I saw my mother, Linda, walking toward me, a thin smile on her face. She was dressed to the nines. As always, her pearls gleaming in the light. "Sophie, do you like your meal?" she asked, her voice dripping with sweetness and condescension. Confused, I looked at the small plate before me. There was nothing on it but a single piece of dry bread. My throat tightened, and I struggled to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" I asked, hoping for some explanation. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, Linda leaned in and whispered, "This is enough for you, isn't it? Photographers like you always eat whatever they can find, don't they?" The words cut deep, a reminder of everything my family had ever thought of me. They had always seen my work as insignificant, a hobby, nothing more than a fleeting pursuit. My success, in their eyes, was nothing but a stroke of luck. Before I could respond, Emily, in her radiant white wedding dress, approached. Her smile was as sweet as honey, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "Sis, are you enjoying yourself?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm glad you came on my special day. But don't worry, I'm not expecting congratulations from you." Her words stung, but I remained silent. I had heard it all before, the mocking, the dismissive comments. It was nothing new, but the cruel laughter that followed as Emily returned to her husband-to-be, James, and as my mother walked away, left me feeling more isolated than ever. The guests around me shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding my gaze. I clutched the small USB drive in my bag, my fingers trembling not from fear, but from the realization that I had had enough. For years, I had taken this treatment in silence, never once standing up for myself. But tonight was different. The time had come. The time had come to show them, show everyone, the truth. The evening continued as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, the tension within me grew. I was no longer willing to let them diminish my worth. This was the moment when I would reclaim my power. As the evening wore on, the speeches began, and the energy in the room seemed to settle into a well-rehearsed rhythm. The groom's father, Emily's best friend, and even my own father, Richard, took turns at the microphone, offering words that were meant to be heartfelt but felt hollow. The applause that followed each speech rang in my ears. But I couldn't escape the growing feeling inside me that I had been overlooked. Cast aside, and now, just a silent observer at my own family's celebration. It wasn't until the scheduled speeches were nearing an end that the MC unexpectedly stepped forward with an announcement that would change everything. "May I have your attention, please?" he asked. "We have a few words from the bride's sister, Sophie Turner." I could feel the room's energy shift in an instant. The surprise was palpable. I saw the tension on my mother's face, her lips tightening into a thin line. Emily's expression was one of shock and disbelief. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to speak, let alone be given any attention at all. But in that moment, I knew it was time to finally be heard. My heart raced as I stood up, taking a steadying breath before walking toward the stage. Every step felt like a release from the weight I had been carrying for so long. When I reached the microphone, I looked out at the room full of guests, their eyes now on me, unsure of what was coming next. I felt a surge of calm wash over me, like I was no longer the person they had tried to silence for all these years. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "On my sister Emily's special day, I've prepared a special gift." I handed the USB drive to the MC, who, though confused, passed it to the technician to load. The screen above us flickered to life, and the room fell into an eerie silence. The lights dimmed, and the large screen slowly illuminated the space, showcasing images no one had expected to see. The first frame that appeared on the screen had a date and location: 6 months ago. Emily Harrison's engagement party, Boston Harbor Hotel. I stood there, watching as the video began, recounting the night when my mother had invited me to photograph the event. What seemed like an innocent request was the beginning of something far more sinister. The video showed Emily and James, smiling and laughing as they mingled with the guests, their perfect love story unfolding on screen. But then, unexpectedly, the camera zoomed in on Emily, who was standing alone in a corner, staring at her phone. Her expression shifted as she read a message on the screen. "Waiting for you tonight at the usual place. Let's make this our last night together. In my bed, Mike." A murmur rippled through the crowd. James's face went pale as the shocking message flashed across the screen. My mother stood frozen, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Emily's eyes widened in panic, and she rushed forward, shouting, "It's a lie. It's been edited. You can't believe this." But the video didn't stop there. It continued, showing a clip of Emily meeting someone in the hotel hallway. Someone who was not James. The man, Mike, pulled her into a passionate embrace, confirming the affair I had already known about. The conversation that followed made it even clearer. Emily had been using James for his family's wealth and status, all the while keeping another man in her life. The gasps from the guests were deafening, and I could feel the weight of their judgment. But in that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. My family had used me for years, mocking my success and belittling my career, while they concealed their own dirty secrets. Tonight, I was finally telling the truth. And as painful as it was to expose my sister's betrayal, I couldn't allow myself to remain silent anymore. The room was in chaos now. People murmured, pointing fingers, and the realization of Emily's deceit spread quickly. But the video was far from over. It showed the cruel reality of my life. How my parents had belittled me for years. How my father had dismissed my work as inconsequential. And how Emily had mocked me for not fitting their image of success. But most crushing of all was the final part of the video. The conversation that had taken place behind closed doors at the family mansion. "Just 2 months ago. I don't even want to invite Sophie to my wedding. Emily had said. But I have to because people will ask questions if I don't. The video captured my mother's cold laughter. And my father's harsh words. She's just a burden on this family. What does it matter if she's successful now? She'll never be enough. As the video came to an end, I could see the stunned expressions of the guests around me. My family, though seated at their table, seemed to have lost all color in their faces. The truth had been exposed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was the one to be ashamed of. I looked out at the room. My emotions a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and relief. It had taken so long for me to find the courage to speak up. To reveal everything I had kept hidden for so many years. But standing there, in front of everyone, I felt free. Tonight, I said, my voice steady as I addressed the room. I wanted you all to know the truth. My family may have tried to silence me, to diminish my worth, but I am no longer afraid. I've endured everything they've thrown at me. The table with a single piece of bread? That was no mistake. That was deliberate. And for years, they've tried to convince me that I don't matter. But today, I stand here to tell you all that I do matter. I turned to James, who stood by the stage. His expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. James, I said, you deserve real love. I hope you find happiness. But you're not to blame for any of this. And as I turned to leave the stage, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth had been revealed. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally stepping into the light. As I stepped off the stage, the heavy silence in the room was deafening. It felt surreal, but there was also a strange sense of relief, like I had just taken off a mask I'd been wearing for years. I could see the stunned faces of the guests, their expressions shifting from shock to sympathy. And for the first time, I realized that I was no longer invisible. The truth, raw and unflinching, had found its way to the surface. And nothing could undo it. Behind me, I could hear the chaos unfolding. Emily, her wedding day shattered, stood with tears streaming down her face, her voice trembling with rage. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but the damage was done. James, his heart broken and his trust shattered, stood frozen, too stunned to respond. And my parents, who had always thought they could control everything, now found themselves exposed, vulnerable, and ashamed. I didn't look back as I made my way toward the exit. I had nothing left to prove to them. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt the weight of years of pain and rejection lifting off my shoulders. I was no longer the person they had tried to diminish. I was free. Clarissa, the art gallery owner who had always believed in me, was waiting outside. You did it, she said, a knowing smile on her face. You showed the world who you truly are. Now, it's time to move forward. And that's exactly what I did. I continued to take photographs that captured truth, emotion, and life, because that was my mission. I found my family not in blood, but in the people who truly saw me, who understood and valued my work. This is just the beginning. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. Subscribe to our channel for more life stories.